New York, stand up!
The WNBA is so important.
Okay, Tom. God bless. Good night.
This is nothing but that sports talk.
Welcome to another episode of Nothing But That Sports Talk. Rafique Louison. Welcome back, Knox Louison. It's been a while. How you doing, my guy?
I am doing good, cuz. How are you?
Doing all right. And as you can see, the list behind me is not just any list of basketball players. It's a 75th anniversary list for the top players of the first 75 years of the NBA. And there have been a couple of snubs. Do you think what you think are the snubs of the NBA first 75?
The snubs. So obviously, first and foremost, let me say that I think the list is a pretty good list. And any list that anyone comes up with, there's going to be some questions and some concerns here and there. But I think for the most part, they got the names right. But there are a few snubs that like kind of stand out to me. Off top, Klay Thompson, who I know recently tweeted about the fact that he was snubbed. He's a 3-time NBA champion. He's probably the second greatest three-point shooter. Sorry, not probably. He's the second greatest three-point shooter of all time. It's kind of hard to leave him off that list because he's so great. The NBA records that he holds, I think he's tied for the most three-pointers in a game, and he owns the record for most points in a quarter. Next up is personal favorite, Tracy McGrady. Honestly, Tracy McGrady gives the business to probably 95% of the guys on this list. He's just that talented. Vince Carter for longevity and popularity and talent as well. Vince Carter's prime years were really exceptional, especially those years in New Jersey. He was really good. And surprisingly, I didn't think about him at first, but now that I'm thinking about him, Dwight Howard. He's like a 3 or 4-time defensive player of the year. He's an NBA champion, obviously later in his career, but perennial all-star. So I think that's another huge snub.
Yeah, you make an interesting point. I mean, getting back to Vince Carter, although he did finish his career like being so-so at best, but when he started, he was busting dunks out the gate up until his days with New Jersey Nets. But Vince Carter is considered one of the greatest dunkers of all time. He won a slam dunk championship. Oh yeah, and not to mention Tracy McGrady. Even though he's not hasn't gotten the first round up until like when he was a bench warmer for the San Antonio Spurs in 2013, he made a lot of memorable moments, like the late come from behind win against the San Antonio Spurs at regular season game in 2005. Although the Spurs did go on to win a championship that year, but yeah, just while we're on the subject, McGrady should have been on that list, or even at least a tie for being the top 75 players of all time. But this goes to show how competitive the NBA league is as far as the greatest of all time, or GOAT, if you're being specific.
Yeah, I do think that it's a good list. Like I said before, I really don't take much issue. There are a couple of names on there that, Anthony Davis ahead of Dwight Howard. I don't see that one. Like Anthony Davis, undoubtedly, if he stays healthy, which he's had a hard time doing, would probably go on to be deserving of this list. But today, as we speak, he hasn't done more in the NBA than Dwight Howard has done. Dwight Howard surpasses him in virtually every category in terms of hardware and accomplishments. No disrespect to Damian Lillard. He is one of my all-time favorite players. I'm not sure how Damian Lillard goes ahead of Vince Carter or Tracy McGrady. Especially, again, Tracy McGrady. I know his career started to go down a bit when injuries started to come into a factor, but skill for skill, pound for pound, how many players on this list are actually better basketball players than Tracy McGrady? Not many. And the guys who are better than him would probably give him all the praise in the world. I think he's probably the most notable snub, just because I think there's an argument that can kind of be made for Vince Carter where you can say, okay, he had these years in Toronto that kind of soured. He had those years in New Jersey where he was really good. And after that, he kind of tailed off a little bit. Not saying that he wasn't good, but he's no longer that superstar that he was. I can't make that argument for Tracy McGrady. We all know it was just injury. If he doesn't get hurt, if his body doesn't start to fail him, he goes on to having a much more successful and illustrious career. And again, talent-wise, he's better than a lot of guys on his list. A lot.
That is also true. But for my years watching the NBA, what makes an anniversary team player, you have to have the accolades. You have to put up good stats. You have to have historic numbers, numerous 50-point games, or you don't necessarily have to have a lot of 50-point games. You just have to actually stand out, not just from on the court, but off the court. and you have to do something that's completely memorable. Like Damian Lillard got on that list for a reason. He made a lot of plays, a lot of game winners that are memorable, between the shot against the Houston Rockets in 2014 to the shot against the Oklahoma City Thunder in 2019. I mean, that guy literally knows how to make memorable three-point shots from deep. And there's a reason Stephen Curry's in the list and not Klay Thompson. It was originally Stephen Curry's team. Even though he didn't really accomplish much before Klay Thompson got drafted, it was literally his team.
It's still his team. I'm not questioning Steph's place. Obviously, Steph to me is top 20 players of all time. I have him, probably around the 15 mark. So I'm not questioning Steph. But here's my thing to you, and here's my thing to anyone who's looking at this list. There are certain names that if I'm telling the NBA story, the 75-year length story of the NBA, Anthony Davis's name doesn't have to come up in that story. I'll give you Damian Lillard. I think Damian Lillard's three-point shots in the playoffs are iconic. And he's also the greatest Portland Trailblazer of all time. But at this stage in the NBA career, where does Anthony Davis lie in the fabric of that story? A really talented guy who won a championship and played for the Lakers, but does he have, you can tell the NBA story without mentioning Anthony Davis. You could.
Yeah.
Like, I think people have mentioned Reggie Miller, but I'm like, you can't tell the NBA story without mentioning Reggie Miller going against the New York Knicks in the 1990s in the playoffs and him mocking Spike Lee, or him going toe-to-toe with Michael Jordan in the playoffs. So the NBA story has to include Reggie Miller. Another guy that I felt was kind of questionable, Gary Payton. Don't get me wrong. I grew up loving Gary Payton, but ahead of Dwight Howard, ahead of Tracy McGrady, nah, can't. We can't just act like just because guys and ahead of Klay Thompson especially. Klay Thompson, again, second greatest shooter in NBA history, three-time NBA champion, a hell of an on-ball defender. It's crazy to think that his name got left off.
Yeah, there's so many names actually that could have been up there. And, well, there are at least a couple names I can understand that they're not on the 75 list, and that's Kemba Walker. I mean, the only memorable thing he had was having the most points scored all time by the Charlotte Hornets. And he only made the playoffs like 3 or 4 times. With only 1 year, he gotten the team out of the first round, announced with Jason Tatum. And Jason Tatum, he's not on the list. It's still early in this guy's career. And Kyrie Irving, very talented, iconic shot. He's not on the list. I mean, in my opinion, it's obviously because of the off-court drama that the guy's been having and not thinking about basketball much. You don't know what he's thinking, but that's a conversation for later. And also, well, Stephon Marbury, even though he did have a lot of crazy games himself, he's not on the list. You have to have a lot of accolades
Accolades.
The case. Excuse me, accolades. You have to have a lot of accolades.
I mean, you're just a real good Knicks fan, so that's why you mentioned Kemba Walker's name. So he was never. You knew I was going to say that. I mean, Kemba Walker's one of my all-time favorite players from UConn. So, but yeah, he's absolutely not deserving of the 75 list. I think the Kyrie one is interesting. I do think that the snub with Kyrie has to play into what's going on with him off the court at the moment. But I would say I would not include him in the top 75 players of all time. I just don't think he fits there. He's obviously close, but not top 75. But you can't tell the NBA story without mentioning the shot that he hits in the finals against the 73-9 Golden State Warriors, which is why a guy like Kyrie Irving and a guy like Klay Thompson are deserving to be on the 75. Excuse me. Well, a guy like Klay Thompson is deserving to be on the 75 list because he played from that team with 73 wins. And I can understand why Kyrie would be on the 75 list because he hit one of the biggest shots. But I just think because of what's going on with him right now, that's probably what led to him not being part of the list. Yeah,
that's true. But let's get into some of the players that I feel that did deserve to make the list. I mean, come on, Jason Kidd. He had a historic career. Like, what absolutely. About him making the list?
Jason Kidd, to me, if we're just talking about point guard skill, like the ability to control a team and set players up and create shots for other guys, he's probably second only to Magic Johnson in that sense. He's that great of a point guard, so he's totally deserving of the list. Obviously, we can't speak on the guys who we've never seen play, which always gets tricky when you have these lists. Like, we can't speak on Billy Cunningham or Dave Cowens or someone like that. But obviously the names that stand out, of course, the contemporaries, your LeBrons, your Melos, your Iversons, your Kobe's, D-Wade, Kawhi Leonard. I thought it was good that he got in there. Shaq, Steve Nash, Moses Malone, a lot of great players. Ray Allen, Giannis, who I think Giannis definitely got in with last year's championship, which he deserved, obviously. But yeah, man, it's a good list. I think it's a good list. I think they got it right. There's a couple of those I'm like, I'm not sure.
Yeah, you do make an interesting point. But for somebody that actually watched basketball live in person in the 90s and up until, well, I started watching in late 2005. So only you can tell me how great players, whether or not players like a Michael Jordan or Dominique Wilkins or James Worthy, or Hakeem Olajuwon, do you think they're deserving of being on the list?
Of course. In particular, the guys you named are guys who will never not be on a top NBA list. Those guys are elite all-time talent. There's gonna be some names here that, unfortunately, due to time, they're just gonna fall off. Honestly speaking, I'm not trying to come at anybody, but Earl Monroe ahead of Klay Thompson. Oh, come on, man. That's not right. Kevin McHale ahead of Tracy McGrady. Oh, I guess Kevin McHale got hardware. But yeah, for the most part, these names all deserve it. Russell Westbrook's on here, right? Yeah, he is. Well deserved.
I mean, come on, triple double Westbrook. Why wouldn't you put him on the list with that?
Yeah, James Harden on there too. Well deserved. So the guys before your time, yeah, the ones I've seen play, your Mikes, Kareem, I caught at the tail end. Magic, I caught at the tail end of their careers. Those guys definitely deserve as well. Those guys are all-time greats, top 5 talents, to be honest.
And well, and I'm only speaking this because I actually watched the Jordan documentary last year or a year and a half ago. Charles Barkley made his case of why he deserved to be on the list. And I've seen a couple of old games where they were facing the Warriors and using the playoffs like way long time ago during the days of Rick Barry. Another guy that, well, yeah, I don't know why. Yeah, Rick Barry's on the list.
Yeah, I mean, Rick Barry was huge. He's before my time, so let me not act like I know Rick Barry like that. So I know him from reading and watching highlights of him. Again, it's no disrespect to anyone who is on the list. It's just kind of disrespectful to a few people who were left off the list. So I have questions about Earl Monroe. I have questions about Rick Barry to some extent. I love Reggie Miller. I got some questions about that. Anthony Davis, as I mentioned before, and Damian Lillard, as I mentioned before. Those guys are close, but I don't think those guys are more deserving than, as I mentioned, Klay Thompson and Tracy McGrady and Vince Carter.
Yeah.
And Dwight Howard. Sorry, Dwight Howard. Dwight Howard, definitely. Probably even more so than anybody else. Dwight Howard has so much hardware. How is he not on this list?
Exactly. Oh, yeah. We can't forget Ben Wallace. Oh, yeah. Wait. Ben Wallace. Yeah.
Ben Wallace not top 75. No way.
I mean, if it wasn't for Ben Wallace, the Pistons might not have had that championship in 2004. I mean, but only you can vouch for that one because you actually see that championship run. I wasn't watching at the time, so
I'm not taking anything away from Ben Wallace. I actually think his defensive presence and ability is somewhat underrated and kind of forgotten because that's kind of all he did, and it was a different time. But top 75 players of all time, not a chance, not close.
Yeah, that's true. And that pretty much concludes our conversation about the 75 anniversary team list, aka the list that's literally sitting right behind me, as you can see. But now we can get our bold predictions for the upcoming NBA season. I mean, I know we're like literally a few days in, but what are your predictions for the NBA, starting from who you think is going to take the MVP trophy?
Man, MVP. It's still early. I'm going to go out and say Giannis is going to win it again. I know it's only preseason, but he looks like he has rounded his game perfectly where he has a hesitation hand dribble before he shoots a jump shot, like a pull-up shot now. And I think he takes it. If not, my run-up, obviously, KD.
What about Defensive Player of the Year?
It would have been Ben Simmons, but he's he's going through Philadelphia stuff right now. Defensive Player of the Year, it's a tough one. It'd be lazy to give it to Rudy Gobert again, so I'm not going to go in that direction. I don't think Draymond is still that defensive player he used to be. Kawhi's not going to get enough time. That's a tough one. If a dark horse, depending on how well that team does, and if he stays healthy, is DeAndre Hunter from the Atlanta Hawks. That kid is a lockdown defender. If he can stay healthy and the Hawks can finish in the top 4 or 5 in the East, he's my pick.
And then another pick I would recommend, Most Improved Player.
Most improved. Who's about to break out? Oh, I'm going Ant-Man. Anthony Edwards.
Yeah, Anthony Edwards could break out too. I mean, well, I can't really predict rookie of the year until I actually have a sense of the type of playing style that the rookies coming into this year's draft could be. But to me, it's a time between Chad Cunningham and Jalen Green, the kid from the G League. I
Oh,
think
Cade Cunningham and Jalen Green.
yeah, I think those guys could be tied for rookie of the year.
Yeah, they were the first two picks, and I do think they are a lot. I think it's a good draft class, but I think those guys have superstar potential, whereas everyone else in the draft class has like all-star, borderline star potential. So I would say either one of them. I agree with you. It's kind of hard to predict rookie of the year because so many different things happen, so many different factors go into it. But I'll go out and say if Cade Cunningham can stay healthy, he wins it. The ball's going to be in his hands the most.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, that is true. Or it could be that kid that got drafted to the Houston Rockets.
Yeah, either or.
But yeah, coach of the year. I'm taking a gamble and picking Steve Nash. I mean, the way that he turned the Nets franchise around last year up until they got the second best seed in the Eastern Conference, I could see that progressing slightly more.
I don't think Steve Nash will be in the running to win coach of the year just because the Nets were good before he got there. And they have, arguably two of the five best players in the world on their team. Coach of the year. Wow, that's a tough one. That's one I really haven't thought about much. Let's go with I'm going to go with Mike Budenholzer.
Yeah, I guess I could give it to Mike Budenholzer. I mean, after all, he coaches the defending champion Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah.
So there's that. Now, which team you think is going to come out the East and the West? Starting with the East.
You left out six man.
Oh, six man. My bad. Who thinks we're six man of the year? I would probably give it to Derrick Rose.
How did I know the Knick fan was going to pick the Knick?
Why not? I mean, come on, man. He's a crafty veteran. Even though he may not be what he used to after he got injured, but he's still proving that he can hit the floater shots, take it to the hole, and get people involved in the offensive end. Like, come on.
I'm gonna go Heat. I'm gonna go Heat Nation and say Tyler Hero.
Yeah, Tyler Hero can be in that conversation too. I mean,
I think it's his. I think it's his award to lose.
Yeah, but yeah. Now we can stick with the Eastern Conference and Western Conference. Which team you think is coming out the East? I mean, because I'm picking Brooklyn for that one.
Welcome aboard. So always got to say, in provided all teams stay healthy and injuries don't come into play, because we saw how that affected Brooklyn last year. I'm going with Brooklyn coming out of the East. My runner-up out the East will be Milwaukee, but I will not be surprised if Milwaukee wins the East again. I think that they haven't lost much. Granted, their bench is not the most deep bench at all, but they're still bringing back Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. So I'm gonna go Brooklyn, and Milwaukee's my runner-up.
Yeah, for Eastern Conference, yeah, I'm sticking with the same thing. Except, I mean, assuming that the Ben Simmons situation doesn't get straightened out or he gets straightened somewhere else, I'm probably going to go Brooklyn #1 and runner up the Milwaukee Bucks. And for the Western Conference,
you think if Ben Simmons' situation gets fixed and he returns to Philly, you think Philly has a chance?
Yeah, Philly can have a chance. I mean, he's like the face of the franchise.
He's not the face of the franchise. Joel Embiid is the face of the franchise.
Okay, that's true. But he was #1 pick when he came in.
And he hasn't played like one.
That is also true. He does need to develop his jump shot.
He doesn't need to develop a jump shot. He needs to shoot. He needs to score. Like, I think, not to deviate too much, but I think the problem with Ben Simmons is maybe he's not listening to the right people, or maybe he's listening to the criticism and not the critique. He doesn't need to take 6 threes like Steph Curry. He doesn't need to take pull-up jumpers or step-back jumpers like Luka Doncic or James Harden. He just needs to be aggressive on offense. What essentially happens why Philadelphia has struggled so much is he's not a factor on the floor. So if teams know offensively they're going against you or you're running basically a 4-man offense, how potent is that really? He just needs to be aggressive, take shots. If you miss them, it's okay. Like Rajon Rondo famously is not a great scorer, a great shooter, but he's always been effective because he shoots the ball when he's open. If you're open, shoot the ball or step in, hit a 2, take a 2. Doesn't always have to be a 3.
Yeah, that is also true. Now, sticking with the Western Conference, obviously I'm picking the Los Angeles Lakers. And my runner-up, I'm going to give it to the Phoenix Suns. I mean, they did take out the Lakers in the first round of the playoffs because of the beating up injuries the Lakers had. Like, I'm taking a gamble. Suns going to make it to the conference finals again.
I don't think the Suns make. Go ahead.
But that is assuming the Clippers don't get together and have Kawhi Leonard back and Stephen Curry's hot shooting that we saw the first 2 games of the regular season doesn't progress all the way to the end.
Well, we see with Steph.
Klay Thompson does come back. It's going to be a while before the Warriors get back to the Ghostly Warriors that we saw in the mid-late 2010s. So
we see with Steph's hot shooting last season, it doesn't translate to you necessarily finishing a high seed. So they need Klay Thompson back 100%. If they get Klay Thompson back, I think if they get Klay back early enough and he's looking close to 100%, I think they have a chance of going to the conference finals. Obviously, the West is the Lakers to lose. It's up to them. If they want to win the West, they're going to win the West. If they can stay healthy, they'll win the West. I don't see Phoenix having a repeat. I think Kawhi is going to be out much longer than people anticipate. So I don't think the Clippers will finish that high. Portland needs to blow it up. Denver, they're without Jamal Murray. He's going to be out for a minute too. So it's the Lakers' conference to win.
That's also true. And you know what?
I think one way or another, we're going to get either LeBron versus KD with Brooklyn versus LA, or we're going to get LeBron versus Giannis with LA versus Milwaukee.
And if that matchup does happen, I can't wait for that. I mean, and if that happens, that'll be another example of why most of the players that we just mentioned are in the top 75 anniversary team. And you never know how it's going to change when we get to NBA 100.
I mean, the Lakers have, 4 guys on the top 75 and a 5th guy who should have been there. They got Russ, Bron, Melo, AD. Dwight should be there.
Yeah, that's true.
They're stacked.
Well, that concludes episode Nothing But That Sports Talk. Thank you for coming back, Knox, and I can't wait to do more episodes with you in the future, my guy.
Yes, sir.
And to all the ballers out there, get your head in the game.